Hello, I'm Simon Emmerson. I'm sad not to see an audience in front of me now. I get a buzz from such human presence and battle against systems that try to tie me down to one location when presenting a talk. I much prefer to move around the presentation space to give both you and me different angles of perception. But of course, I hope I can still do that for the music I'll discuss. I've very much enjoyed preparing this talk for you to see and hear today. I hope you enjoy it too. My great thanks to Duncan MacLeod and other organisers of this not far symposium for this invitation to Keynote. It is a pleasure to talk about composing with electronics, and I shall focus on the work I wrote for Carla Rees a couple of years ago, Solo Flute Quartet, a work for 3 Kingma system flutes, concert flute, alto, bass, and standard piccolo with live electronics. I shall also deal with wider issues which I hope are pertinent to the conference themes of contemporary composition. In 2016, Carla Rees gave the 40th birthday performance of my first piece for flute and electronics, Spirit of 76, for flute and accelerating delay. This piece was written in 1976 for Catherine Lucas, an American flute player resident in the UK, for the US bicentennial celebrations of that year. I completed it as part of my PhD studies, and it has become my longest performed work. It is scored for concert flute using quarter tones throughout the entire range of the instrument. Here are some extracts from the score. The sound is sent to an accelerating tape delay. This was a live system built from 2 tape machines, the left one on record, the right on playback. These delayed, then replayed the flute sound 3/4 of a tone higher and correspondingly shorter and faster. This was fed back to the input to create an ever-rising, ever-speeding up, ever more dense texture. The tape loop across the stage floor starts at 64 seconds long and is slowly eaten away till it finishes at 4 seconds, when the tape is taut between the machines and the piece abruptly stops. Here are some images of what the analog tape system looks like. Early in the current century, around 2004, I created a max patch with the same function as the analog electronics, but losing the theatrical dimension of the original. We no longer had a visual process to follow too. I shall show a short video extract of this later on. Carla showed me her Kingma system flute while preparing this performance. In an interpretation of Spirit of 76, it was the enhanced quarter tone functionality of the Kingma that was of primary interest. I shall pause the flute-focused narrative here to discuss my general view of composition and live performance with electronics. Why do it? What does this allow us to do? I search for a firm relationship between the musical aims and the technology, a direct relation between the technical process and the poetics of the work. But what do I mean by poetics? How do I approach live performance? How does technology help us? In my case, this is probably related to some kind of metaphor, which the technology helps, even allows me to articulate, some kind of mapping of expressing something to technical function. Here are some themes: landscape, spaces and places, social space and live interaction, personal space, mind and memory, movement, energy and change, visualization, sound, painting and colour. There are many more. Let me give a few more specific examples. Returning to the work I just introduced, Spirit of 76, as the delay time decreases from 64 to 4 seconds, the sound rises inexorably to a block of very high pitch. We follow the ballast tape spool across the floor. The tape moves steadily towards tension between the machines. What will happen? Will it break? The increasing tension is literal and metaphorical. The metaphoric level is the enormous and inexorable rise of energy and productivity good and bad, that is the United States of America. Two years later, I wrote a piece for singers and electronics, Ophelia's Dream. The solo soprano, the Ophelia character, is surrounded by 4 microphones at head height, each directed to a corresponding loudspeaker surrounding the audience, along with a tape head echo system and other processes controlled at the mixing desk. The metaphor here is a kind of spatialized mind, perhaps spatialized emotion. We are both inside and outside her head at the same time. She is trapped by the technology, the music, the text, the other characters, singers, and possibly by the audience too. It is the technology that has enabled this sound theatre. In the late 1980s, the first generation of digital processors became available. I wrote sentences for soprano and live electronics, setting texts by Walt Whitman, Henry David Thoreau, and Shakespeare. These were referenced to the 4 ancient Greek elements: earth, air, water, fire. These in turn related to 4 metaphoric ideas, roles, for the live electronics. A mimetic role, a direct imitation of some sonic phenomena. Impressionistic, the evocation of something probably vague and inexact, even slightly distorted. Synesthesic, the direct mapping of colour to sound. Expressionistic, an attempt to represent and convey an emotion. Then there's memory. Francis Yates' great book, The Art of Memory, examines ancient Greek memory methods that came through the Roman world to medieval and Renaissance Europe. The key principle relates 2 elements: places and images. A specific place, a locus, is easily memorized. It can be real or imaginary. Then images are what we wish to remember. This can include texts, in fact anything. We place an image at a specific locus and memorize it. These places, these loci, relate to each other such they can be walked through in the imagination to recall each image in turn. Here is Robert Flood's Memory Theatre, published at around the time of the great Elizabethan and Jacobean theatres of Shakespeare's time, such as London's Globe and Rose Theatres. The theory is most often based on the number 5, 5 doors, 5 columns, and these can sequence. Go through one of the 5 doors and you might have another 5 to choose from, and so on, all in your imagination. In 2010, I constructed the work Memory Machine. A loudspeaker installation has the role of a memory stage. Doors appear to open round the audience to allow sonic memories to appear. There are soundscape environments and frozen fragments of music. A max patch controls movements of the different layers of memory in ways we cannot predict. It is a variable work, which will rarely be heard exactly the same twice. Finally, let's look at space, place and landscape. In 1985, Trevor Wishart published his book On Sonic Art. I helped with the revised edition of 1996, which, with a chapter to my own Language of Electroacoustic Music of 1986, discuss landscape in terms of the relationship of real and imaginary. I wanted to adapt and apply some of these ideas to live electronics. I needed to develop further the vocabulary of landscape and how we describe the functions of sound transformation. My first attempt was a simple binary pair, local, field. Local functions seek to extend, but not to break, the perceived relation of human performer action to sound production, while field functions place the results of this activity within a context, a landscape, or an environment. This was soon developed further, subdividing each event, stage, arena, landscape. I called these space frames. I realized only some time later that all this had done was reinvent the ancient Greek theatre. Here is an image of Epidaurus, an event on a stage in an arena set in a landscape. And here is a diagram of the same theatre. Interestingly, this seems to reverse our current obsession with sound immersion. Here the sound event is surrounded by the audience. The seats for those attending spread well over half the circle of the theatre around the performance area, known as the orchestra. The outer arc of seats is about 198 degrees, the inner arc about 216. As an important footnote, I would exhort you to look at the widest range of performance practices from around the world in terms of the physical, social and psychological spaces that are explored, from Japanese no drama, Indonesian shadow puppets, Brazilian block parties and many more. John Cage famously reconfigured these spaces in, for example, his Variations series and in circus works such as Roratorio. In a live performance I attended in the 1980s of that work, there were recordings from many locations in Ireland projected from above, Cage's amplified voice intoning mesostics from Finnegan's Wake, mixed with Irish folk music from the gallery. Other of his works were mixed in at various times, for example, inlets, projecting at high amplification the sound of a slowly turning conch shell partly filled with water. Small becomes large, even fast, while the large scale can become chamber-sized, all enabled and communicated by the technology. Let us return to the flute world. While for the earlier piece it was the quarter-tone performance functionality of the Kingma system that was the main focus, I now turned my attention to the enhanced timbral, especially multiphonic possibility of these instruments. I was also immediately interested in working with the low-pitched members of the family. Hence the idea of a piece using the complete range of the flutes came about quite quickly. It also felt logical to add the only non-Kingma instrument, piccolo, to complete a quartet and to cover a wide pitch range. I immediately conceived of the quartet in surround sound space, each instrument occupying both a position in pitch space and a position in real space enveloping the audience in the total tone colour that could be created across a large part of the human hearing range. Different parts of the spectrum would inhabit different locations. Although I wanted to compose a live work, I wasn't sure when we set out where I wanted to go. For me, and I suggest for many others, a high-quality studio recording is the start for any kind of work in this field. You can listen repeatedly to the sounds, hearing out the minute changes and nuances. As we shall see in a moment, this is especially valuable for working with multiphonics. You can also record the performer's comments, what's easy, difficult, unstable, variable, controllable. You can ask questions and hear answers in both words and sounds. Research into potential materials using both systematic and unsystematic procedures emerges. As an important footnote, I wish I had videoed the session too, or at least taken some more detailed images of the flute and microphone positions. You might like to do so. This has two aspects, two stages. The first is the recording session itself as practice research, an interaction of musicians, composer, performer, instruments and technology. Two kinds of technology meet: the highly developed craft technology of the instrument with the electronic technology of the modern era, with the musician as facilitator. The studio is an important partner because the way you use the technology is fundamentally important. For example, the choice of microphones, their positioning around the instrument to capture as much of the sound as you can or need. All mechanical instruments are directional, but especially wind instruments, for which different pitches and sounds radiate from different points on the instrument, not only open holes, but perhaps from parts of the key mechanism or mouthpiece area. All such instruments are truly three-dimensional. Their sound space shape changes all the time. We need to use close miking on certain parts of the instrument to capture key clicks, other percussion sounds, subtle soft sounds, extended performance sounds, and so on. The microphones are an extension of our ears. Hildegard Westerkamp long ago described the microphone as a form of microscope with respect to our sounding environment. Think of your head as something that can wrap around an instrument or any sound source. I used 4 microphones on Carla's flutes, a basic stereo pair to capture the overall instrument in space, plus 2 sensitive close mics for breath and key mechanism sounds. And of course, these are recorded to separate tracks, not mixed at all. It was thus a 4-channel recording. The second stage involves further detailed listening. This can take us to many places, and these will be different for composers with different aims, and might be completely unexpected and unpredicted. We can hear the most complex sounds in greater detail, spectrum evolution, noise components, however quiet, however loud. Also, we can combine the sounds in ways literally unthinkable without recording. This might sound like, and indeed is, very similar to a recording session for a studio piece, but for me this always relates back to live performance. The studio is a performance research tool as well. So I'm going to use the recording as a test source of performative ideas. I can try out combinations of the recorded material to create a performance of a piece that does not yet exist. I can also develop the electronics without tedious sessions wasting the performer's time, ironing out the bugs in the patch. I use the recordings as a substitute for having the performer in my studio. I suppose that many composers try to predict results as to what will work in their composition based on their experience and the expertise of their inner ear. This is often impossible in electroacoustic music in its many forms. At least we can only make very general predictions what an electronic process, including simple amplification, might do to a sound. The studio allows us to use our outer ear once more. I try to test through listening what different combinations and sound transformations might work live. So how did I progress the work after this initial studio research phase? Here are the elements. Let's look at the relationships of the multiphonics to harmony and melody. Let's move from thinking of the multiphonics and the quarter tone control, the two aspects of the Kingma system that distinguish it, at least for me. Let's stop thinking of them as technical and call them musical. I wanted to relate the two, the vertical and the horizontal, the melodic with the harmony and timbre. In the 3-hour recording session, there were many examples of multiphonics on all 4 instruments. These were assembled in a single folder for comparison. I isolated 104 of these for further work. I then used the Sonic Visualizer app to analyze each in turn. One mode of its output allowed me simply to transcribe the components to the nearest quarter tone with the sense deviation from this. Here are 2 examples. Then further, here are the results for each instrument of the total 104 such transcriptions. In addition, I created a sampler in my studio that allowed me to try any combinations of the 104 multiphonics. In the end, I decided on groups of 8 for each of the 4 instruments, allowing me to spatialize these in a complete 8-channel ring around me. The ones noted in red on the charts are the ones I chose, 8 for each instrument. Here is the bass flute sequence. I also tried combinations of 8, mixing the instruments. Here's a selection from the many I tried out. First, concert flute and alto. Now, piccolo and bass. Finally, a mellow group of alto and bass. Then, for each instrument in turn, I derived a scale from the total component pitches within the 8 chosen multiphonics. I plan to confine the melodic writing to these scales. There is, of course, an error in this relationship. Just as in our equally tempered semitone system, there is often a mismatch between our standard scale pitches and harmonic series values. This is at the basis of all tuning and temperament systems over the centuries. They are all compromises between these 2 acoustic measures. I like these slight differences. There may be a clash, maybe beats, between a constituent pitch of a multiphonic and a sustained single melodic pitch played at the same time from a scale derived from it. There are some special points now with respect to how we can assemble the music and create a relatively traditional, if extended, score, at least traditional for the flute player, if not the electronics. As a working method, after constructing elements of the live piece from studio recorded fragments, I sent Carla the recordings of the chosen multiphonics to notate. These sound files effectively become an appendix to the score for future performances. Interestingly, she declared some to be unrepeatable or very unreliable, and I had to make a couple of substitutions. Others, she warned me, were unstable or very quiet, and studio recording had exaggerated their presence. Hence I decided to leave questions of dynamic in the hands of the performer as interpreter, working with the electronics to best suit the place of performance. The score is designed to allow flexibility to the performer to interpret time. The space-time notation is not exact. Each of the 16 sections has a duration of 55 time units, approximately seconds. The multiphonics act as anchor points in each section. Linking them together are lyric, melodic texture phrases drawn from the derived scales. These are Fibonacci determined, but I shall give no further details about this. Carla and I recently made a new studio recording which will be used for the Not Far webcast. Here are extracts from the first 4 sections without electronics, so you can hear the live part clearly and directly. You'll see that the multiphonics are written out as chords using the nearest quarter tone pitches. This is not helpful to the performer. The standard method using covered and open-hole charts is eventually what my score will show in addition. This is specific to the Kingma system, and thus, at present, this piece cannot be performed on non-Kingma flutes. Carla has in fact developed her own fingering shorthand for these as well. Let us now look at the live electronics, the max patch. The live electronics are actually relatively simple. There are 2 processes that work in parallel for 2 separate tasks. The first is a development of sustain ideas I have often used in my work. A flute sound is live sampled and sustained. I designed my own granular sustain instruments in Max to do this. For the 8 sustain buffers, there is a first in, first out method. The 9th sample replaces the 1st, and so on. So the drone evolves continuously, tracking towards the particular member of the quartet now playing and away from the previous. The evolution is also articulated in space surrounding the audience. Although clearly originating from the live performer, this acts as anchor and background to the foreground melodic mosaic. With an 8-channel sound system, I spatialize each individual sustain slightly differently onto 4 channels of the 8. Here are some slides showing those divisions. Spatialization of sustains, all possible combinations of 4 adjacent loudspeakers are used. The overall aim is to place the listener inside the timbral space of the flutes, to be precise, their multiphonics, thus to project the instrumental sound in a 3-dimensional structure. I hope the stereo mix made for this symposium preserves some of this sense. Listen on headphones if you can, though it's not essential. Here is a bit more on how that is structured. Let's call this the evolution of spectral space. So, there are 16 sections of the work. Each instrument plays 4 times. The bold line at the top there is that of the live performance. It also gives the number of live sampled sustained multiphonics captured in that section. F for flute, so the first section, 7 multiphonics are captured. P for piccolo, 4 in the second section. A for alto, 3 are captured in the third section. B for bass, 4 in the fourth section. By the end of any section, we can work out the mix of piccolo, flute, alto, bass. Anywhere from 1 to 3, never strictly 4 instruments can be heard together. The spectral space is continually shifting. The final 5 sections make a wavy descent from piccolo, sampled 8 times, so taking up all the sustains by the end of 12, to bass in the final section, similarly sampled 8 times, so dominating the sound by the very end of the work. This is quite like the action of a complex bandpass, sometimes band reject filter, except done by simple addition and subtraction of the multiphonic sustains. In contrast to the sustains, I wanted somehow to project a clearer movement of flute sounds. Especially projected on loudspeakers, we perceive spatial position and movement more clearly for sounds with a clear onset attack. Continuous sounds, drones, do not spatialize very accurately, hence their use in more immersive contexts. So chosen gestures and short sequences are fed to a massive stack of delay lines designed not to repeat short term. These vary in length, number of repeats, and so on. Basically unpredictable, although a variety will always be used overall. Each performance will combine these in different ways, once again in different patterns and combinations around the 8-channel space, intended to create a kind of heterophony, though at unexpected and fragmented times. So how is this scored and put into effect in performance? A second performer follows the flute player. I did not use machine score or performance tracking, which tends to be based on pitch, and multiphonics are not reliable for this. I'm aware of more sophisticated and intelligent methods being developed using aspects of spectral analysis or noise content, but these were not suitable here either. In some previous works I have used tracking, but through the simpler method of amplitude tracking. Loud sounds trigger something in the electronics. For a piece where the sounds to be sampled range from whisper to scream, this method is impossible. So I am happy to remain with a human follower who can also make mistakes. Here are 2 pages of the score with very simple indications for the second performer on electronic to capture the sounds for the 2 processes. The V shape indicates a multiphonic to be sampled and sustained. It's a specific key hit which triggers a pre-programmed bell-shaped sample recording, a smooth amplitude shape with no abrupt attack or fade. This is best if you want a continuous sustain. A boxed X for on and 0 for off are a pair of keystrokes which capture the indicated short note gestures. These vary in length so the total on time is defined in the score, but depends in practice on the performer. This is an abrupt on-off switch, ideally executed in gaps to make sure the sharp attacks are clearly captured. Important to note that I do not treat the score as an ideal, something to be striven for to make a perfect performance. In fact, there are options for the performers based on the listening of the moment. So the electronics operator may add some extra samples if some sampling was ineffective or even missed, but the overall trajectory of the evolution of the spectral space will remain the same. Here, finally, is a longer video extract of the first 4 sections from a live public performance in Belfast last October. It gives a good impression of the way the piece works in practice. As I said, the recording to be webcast in this symposium is a more recent studio recording. This brings us to the conclusion. The work is a journey, unweaving the timbre of the multiphonics into gestures and melodies. as well as creating ever-changing spectral spaces around the audience. It is anchored by the bass flute, the largest yet the most delicate in the production of the sounds used. I hope you enjoy listening to the piece. It lasts 17 minutes. My thanks once again to the organisers for this invitation. It has been a pleasure to present this talk, though tinged with sadness that we cannot be together. I hope to meet as many of you as possible, wherever you are in the world, at some time in the future. There is planned to be a live question and answer session as part of the symposium. I hope you will join that if you can. You are also welcome to get in touch with me directly. Music is, after all, one of the most important things that we do together, and should play a central role in the healing process the world so badly needs. Thank you for listening.